Thank you for listening to PoliticalStorm.com. I'm John Small. Today, we've got a guest joining us because, I'll tell you, it's been kind of a crazy election cycle so far. I said we need a psychologist. So we have Dr. Joy Browne, a nationally acclaimed syndicated radio host and a licensed clinical psychologist as well, offers advice on issues ranging from relationships and marriage, finance, work, career. You can learn more about her radio program and about her at drjoy.com. That's drjoy.com. And joining us right now, we have Dr. Joy. How are you today?
Well, other than the fact that the weather just doesn't seem to clear up here, we've given new meaning to the word funky.
Oh, that's no fun. Well, I'll tell you, where I live today, it is bright and sunny, and I'm actually pretty happy because we had that funky weather last week, so bring on the sun.
Well, look, if you could send some our way, there'd be a whole lot of people that would be really happy with it.
Well, we'll do what we can. Now, speaking of sending things your way, recently up in the Northeast, there was an election in New York. And there's been elections. We've had primaries kind of going on all over the place. Indiana this week. Coming up here next week, we've got a few more. As you and I have talked a few other times now, kind of about the psychology of the voter. Any of the things that you're seeing right now surprise you, or is this kind of what you were expecting as you were looking at this election on how you thought things would play out?
Well, that's a really good question because, I think everybody, including Donald, is surprised at his sort of tide of votes. So, there's on that on the one hand. On the other hand, as we've been talking about from day one, there's such a feeling in this country of disaffectation. And I think that in some ways you've got probably one of the most experienced people ever running for president in Hillary, in that she's been both a senator, she's been a first lady, which I suppose counts as about as much as vice president, and Secretary of State, which is a serious, in terms of foreign policy, a serious position, as opposed to somebody who's never run for elective office except the president, which she pulled out early. So, but in some ways, I think that Hillary's got a real problem because of the disaffectation of the country, that they're just saying, and I think that's part of the reason that Bernie Sanders is doing so well, is, as you know, I think coming out of the Pennsylvania primaries, 2/3 of Republican voters said that they were really fed up with the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And so I think that this election has been less about who we want than who we don't want. And what we don't want is business as usual. What we don't want is the same old lies. What we don't want is the same old government in the hand of lobbyists. And I think that in some ways is really healthy. This has been, and I think you probably agree, one of the weirder political campaign seasons we've ever seen.
I've never seen anything like it in my lifetime, and I'm very interested in politics, so I pay attention. But there are people who don't really pay attention to politics that, for the first time in a long time, are paying attention. And I think that's maybe partially due to the fact that there are candidates in Sanders and candidates in Trump that are non-traditional, and they're saying things that usually no politician would ever say. And it's getting the attention of people who are not necessarily voters in other elections.
Let me ask you a question, because I don't actually know the answer to this.
All right.
I'm not a lawyer. I never ask questions to which I know the answer. Do you know what the voter turnout has been in the primaries? Because, as you know, even in presidential elections, about 40% of the electorate doesn't vote.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. I mean, there are countries where people were willing to die for the vote, and we don't bother getting out of our TV lounger. But do you know whether or not the turnout in the primaries has been heavier than usual or not? I haven't seen anything about it any place, and I've looked for it.
I'm Googling that right now to see, because I know I did hear a story on one of the TV programs, and I failed to remember which one, where they were talking about more voter registrations in one particular state than they had had in a long, long time. So right now I've got a story from Pew Research, and they usually know what they're talking about. They say, so far, turnout in this year's primaries rivaled 2008 records. In 2008, there were records as far as numbers of people who went out to vote. And they're saying right now, this year is rivaling that. So it is quite high.
Okay. Because I just had one experience with, to be quite honest, I'm a registered independent, so I can't vote in primary in New York. But I was talking with some friends of mine, and he is very much for one candidate. And he said, I think it's a foregone conclusion. I don't think I'm going to vote. And I said, oh, no, you have to. And I ran into him day before yesterday, and he said, well, I promised you I would vote, and I did. But so I just wondered whether or not all this Sturm and Drang has increased the number of people who are voting. And I wonder if it's different people voting. It really is an interesting election.
It is.
Or it's an interesting primary. We're not even to the election yet.
Well, and what it says in this story, again, this is from Pew Research, P-E-W, Pew Research. It says the 2016 Republican turnout has been 17.3% of eligible voters, highest since 1980. The Democratic side, it is 11.7%, which is the highest since 1992, with the exception of 2008. 2008, they had a nice turnout as well. So it's not.
Now, wait a minute. You're saying in the primaries, 11% and 17% of the registered voters vote?
And that is a big number for the primaries, which is crazy because think about this. There are so many people that just don't care. They just don't care. And they should. They absolutely should, but they don't care.
But think about what you're telling me. I mean, this kind of is absolutely the underpinnings of what we've been talking about all these months, which is voter disaffection. But because I think they figure it doesn't make any difference who they elect, same old, which is, but think about 11%. That's 1 in every 9 people that can vote didn't. And that's not counting people like me who are independents who can't vote. And 17%, okay, but that's a little bit better. But, geez Louise, that's basically 1 in what, like 8 or something.
Yeah, it's
I mean, it's a ridiculously low number because the primaries, especially this year, are going to determine the ticket.
It is. And I'll tell you the thing that's crazy. I live in the state of South Dakota. Our primaries are the dead last, and we usually don't matter. And up until Cruz and Kasich actually dropped out, I said, we might actually matter this year. You know, my vote might actually matter. But for the first time in a long time, I thought we were going to, and then it went back to the same old normal, now we don't matter.
Well, you matter, but, I mean, but India, who thought Indiana would have been the Dragon Slayer?
I know.
I mean, geez Louise.
Well,
it's just been such a weird election.
So do you watch the news and watch the political coverage, or do you kind of steer clear of that? Or when it comes to that, is that something that does typically attract you?
Just tangentially. Basically, I have to know enough to not be ignorant. But it's not. The coverage, I think, is so biased. You can pick a channel and pick a candidate.
Yep.
And I'm busy. I review movies and theater, and so I watch almost no television, but I know a little bit. But it's I mean, it's just, and again, I think that the coverage of the candidate, I mean, somebody's going to argue, and I think legitimately so, that the media really made Trump.
Oh, yeah.
It was a boring election. It was the same old, and they just decided to make him the focus of all of their stories.
It's been interesting how their focus has shifted. In the beginning, it was a joke because, hey, it's funny, this guy thinks he's going to be president. Then, all of a sudden, he started getting traction, and then the stories started turning very negative. And now it's almost like, well, he's there, so do we embrace this, or what do we do since we made it? It's been really interesting to watch how the focus has shifted over the last 9 months.
Well, and not only the focus of the media and the focus of the electorate, but the focus of the candidate.
Yeah.
I truly think that he was doing this as a joke, that it was a way of increasing his brand and getting more people for his TV show and for the Miss America pageant and all that kind of stuff. And then I think 2 things happened. First of all, the coverage wasn't as positive as he hoped, and he mouthed off about some things that got him into some serious economic jeopardy. And secondly, he was getting some traction.
Yeah.
And I think the 2 combined together to say, what the heck? And we've got a what the heck candidate, I think, who's been married 3 times. You know, I mean, it's declared bankruptcy 3 times. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting kind of election. And one of the problems, which again is what we've been talking about all along, is the only person who has a higher disapproval rating than Hillary is Donald.
Yeah.
Not to mention, we've got an election where we're talking about both candidates by their first name, like they're Madonna and Prince or something.
Oh, yeah. Again, visiting right now, speaking of first names, with Dr. Joy Browne, a nationally acclaimed syndicated radio host, licensed clinical psychologist. And I wanted to ask you, just last week, there was for lack of a better word, riot in the streets outside of a Trump rally where police cars were destroyed. People were, jumping up and down, stomping on things. The F word, it's funny because on TV you couldn't, I think they had to bleep everything because I don't know how they could have showed anything. F this, F that, and the signs that they were holding. When we talk about the psychology of the voter, I was really excited to visit with you about that and say, what is going on? I don't understand their line of thinking there.
Well, I think it's not thinking. I think it's emotions. Remember the movie Network? I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore?
Yeah.
And I think that was just being manifest. Network didn't use the F word quite as much, but that was, a 25-year-old movie. But, I mean, if they made Network today, they'd have exactly that vocabulary and probably exactly that scenario. And, again, it's such a consistent theme of people are just fed up. And to say that 11% of the registered voters voted in a primary that's going to determine the ticket is horrifying.
Yeah.
17% of Republicans, I mean, that's slightly better, but, I mean, they had, in some ways, a more interesting race because they had so many candidates for so long.
Yeah.
But up until, this Tuesday. But, I mean, it's just, people are really fed up. And, I mean, the good news about it is if this were, I mean, we're having our American spring, right?
Yeah,
it's not the
exactly.
Arab spring, but we're having, but people aren't getting killed, although the riot was certainly an alarming kind of thing. It's not what we come to think about the American political process. We think of it as passionate but orderly and nonviolent, and this was really a violent occurrence. And both sides making hay off of it, as opposed to both sides saying, "Hey, look, we don't do this in this country. We don't have riots. We don't vote with violence. We don't vote with our fists or guns. Or we can be passionate, but we're not violent." And neither of them really did it, which was a little alarming.
One of the things
that blamed the other candidate, the other candidate said I had nothing to do with it. I would have really liked to have heard some statesman-like out of both candidates.
And just an observation on my part, I wonder how many of the people that were rioting were also going and voting, because if you're going to be out in the streets, busting up police cars, and I know California hasn't had their chance to vote yet, but will those people show up and vote?
Well, it's a good point, and I think that's what those numbers, those extraordinarily high numbers, even though they're embarrassingly low, the primaries are saying is that both sides are feeling like you got to get out the vote. And so I think you're seeing people who haven't voted before. Now, whether it's the thugs, my guess is that there are a couple of thugs who have been registered for the first time. It's kind of like the little Girl Scout who was smart enough to put up a stand across from the medical marijuana stand in Colorado.
Yeah.
If I were registering voters, I would go to the riot and register voters.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Now, talking about an impassioned group of people, the Bernie Sanders group, I put out a page last week that showed he does not have a mathematical chance to get enough delegates to actually get the nomination. He's done, but he's not dropping out. And part of that is I've heard him say, I owe it to my voters, the people who are supporting me, to stay in. Now, what do you think is going to happen? Some of these people don't realize that, you're on a train that literally can't go anywhere because there's not enough votes left for him to get the nomination. What do you think is going to happen to the people who are Sanders supporters when they finally do find out that, okay, this train is done? Do you think they're going to support Hillary? I really don't know that they're going to necessarily support Trump. What do you think they'll do?
Well, I think it really depends on Bernie. I mean, I think he is going to be the linchpin that either says, look, we fought the good fight. It also, I suppose, depends on Hillary about whether she asks him to be vice president, which is always, on the ticket, which has always been kind of bandied about and always denied. But it would make some sense to me. But I'm not running anybody's campaign. But I think it'll depend on him, whether he says, well, we fought the good fight, I now turn you loose. Who knows? As you say, I don't think they'll vote for Trump. I think some will vote for Hillary, some will write Bernie, and some will go to the polls. But I think if he says, look, we're all Democrats, kumbaya, let's play nicely together, I think most of them will go and work with him.
I've been seeing an online media push where, social media, where they're pushing for Bernie to run as an independent.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the Democrats literally handing the presidency to Trump if that happens?
I don't know. There have been independent candidates before, and supposedly, what was it? Was it Ralph Nader handed the election to Bush?
In Perot?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are enough. I guess I'm sure it's something that Trump, lights candles and sacrifice unblemished lambs to every night. I don't know. I just don't know the numbers well enough.
That's funny. Well, thank you again for taking the time. I know you've got a radio show to get ready for. I know you're very, very, very busy, but thank you for chatting with me. If people would like to tune in and listen to your radio program, where do they find all of the affiliates? How can they find one in their neighborhood?
Well, what they need to do is go to drjoy.com, drjoy.com, and put in your zip code, and it'll tell you what station in your area. You can also listen online. I do the program live every day from noon to 3 Eastern. There's also, it turns out, a 24-hour Dr. Joy line.
Wow.
You can listen to programs continually, which I didn't even know. So, and that number, who knew? That's also on the website. You can also listen on your computer if you happen to be in the New York area. I'm at 11:60 a.m. from 1 to 3 in the afternoon, which is 11:60 a.m. So check Dr. Joy, and if I'm not heard in your area, either call up the talk station and say, hey, we want her. We picked up like 5 or 6 new stations in the last week or so
Nice.
That's good. But you can listen online. You can get the podcast or download for free, and there's that 24-hour Dr. Joy line. Who knew?
That is awesome. Dr. Joy, thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
Again, Dr. Joy Browne, nationally acclaimed syndicated radio host, licensed clinical psychologist, and I enjoy chatting with her to find out a little more about the psychology of the voter. And this year, more than ever, it has just been, well, I will just say, it's been crazy. It has been very crazy, so that's why we talked to a psychologist here. Again, Dr. Joy Browne, nationally acclaimed syndicated radio host, clinical psychologist. Learn more about her at drjoy.com. That's drjoy.com. Thank you so much for listening to PoliticalStorm.com. I'm John Small.